Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who will not escape this podcast no matter how many games he swings his cage in.
Tim Longo.
Swinging back and forth in those cages. Final Fantasy IX was the other one I thought of.
And it just made me think, I wonder if there was some deep subconscious influence on our opening of Tomb Raider. Or you're not in a cage.
Could be. You're not in a cage, but you're swinging back and forth. Yeah.
When I originally pitched that. Yeah, it's so funny. I don't know. It's a trope, right?
It is a trope. It is not. This is not unique. Yeah.
But I will say, well, I guess you should announce the game.
I should. We have not said the game yet. We have not in any place acknowledged the game. We are this week and over the next few weeks playing some rotoscoped classics. To pick another little theme, last year we did a few games that were text based in different varieties. Here I feel like we're going to end up with a lot of games that have more deep similarities. That some of which are kind of obvious, in that they're rotoscope, the hook that we're using. Others that are a little deeper, like they were all made by people of French extraction. So it's we'll see how it goes. But the first one we're tackling is 1991's classic from Eric Chahi, kind of a cult classic called Another World. We should set it in its time and all that, but you'd mentioned pre-show your experience with this game in the past, which holds true, but you want to let people in on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, that's what I was about to say before. Yeah, I realized we hadn't actually talked about the game, but yeah, this is a deep what do I want to say? It's deep in my psyche, this game, and I think it probably is the case for a lot of people. Maybe even you. You mentioned a little bit in pre-show, but I was always very much drawn to this game for various reasons we'll talk about. But I probably, and it's very difficult, as we will also talk about. But I started and stopped playing the game. I couldn't even tell you how many times, because I was just, I was one of those many people who was, committed to someday finishing it and trying to get farther in. And I will say I got farther this time than I have ever in my whole life. But I think, to your point about like the cage thing that we were just talking about, this game, I think, had a lot more influence than people realize sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's just such a very special to me. And now I'm glad that I did get so far. I think I'm very near the end, you said.
Yeah. You are one interaction basically away from the end, so you're there. Yeah.
Good. Well,
you got to get the timing right on the one thing you were doing, and then you're basically done. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's just there's so many memorable elements to it, and then this time, having played this time, getting further than I'd ever gotten, I'd seen things that I'd never seen before. Right, so it's like playing it now is a weird, joyous thing because I'm discovering some things that I didn't even know existed in the game, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I just think its influences are very, I think they're more wearing it on its sleeve than people realize. And I think for anyone who has never played this game or doesn't know what this game is, which is sometimes, I think in the US it's called Out of This World. It's definitely something to look up. If you're, and it was, I think it was talked about on the Discord. So we had a bit of a debate back and forth. It came up. I forget who brought it up. I don't think it was me. I don't think it was you, but
wouldn't have been me.
And when it came up, I was like, yeah, that is something that we need to cover at some point. Not just this game, but we'll play some others like you said, in the theme. But this one in particular, I don't know. There's something about the tone and the mood and the setting and the story and the rotoscoping and the puzzles. It's just, I don't know. I think it's very much a gem. And I remember playing it on my AT&T 6300 386 computer back in the day, and in many ways, it's a bit of a mind blowing game, like Prince of Persia is too, but this one in particular for me because of the puzzles and the world building kind of aspect of it. I don't know. I think it's a very special game. This stuck with me the way. I think we'll talk about the influences later, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we should probably set it in its time and all of that. We'll mention first it was designed and implemented by Eric Chahi. He had a little help with audio and music, I think specifically, but he did it over the course of 2 years, essentially solo at Delphine Software, who are also known, I think, especially for Flashback. Sorry, it just went. I had a totally. Yeah, for like, what was it called again? Flashback, which was just a year later than this, and bears some similarities in terms of its look, using rotoscoping, things like that. We'll talk about rotoscoping as well, probably after I set this in 1991. This is the year, so this came out on the Amiga and some other systems at the time, DOS, and I think it was on the Mac as well. Might have been on a late Apple II. I didn't check that. I played it on a PlayStation 4. Also the year of Final Fantasy IV here in the US as Final Fantasy II. How's that for confusing? Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Mario World, Metroid 2: The Return of Samus. A lot of great SNES stuff. SNES North American release was that year as well. Sonic the Hedgehog was maybe the most popular game this year on the Sega, and which we called the Genesis here. And on the PC, I have Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, and Civilization, to mention a couple sort of from that time. The original Civ, not 2 or 3. I think we played 3, right, for the cast. And I guess that means we played just Super Mario World from this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Link to the Past. We played.
Oh, and that's right. We did play Link to the Past. Wow. Okay. Been a minute.
But it is a very good call out to talk about Mario in the same year, though, because both of these are technically have platforming, and they're just so vastly different.
Very, very different.
I definitely want to dig into that because it is at the heart of the rotoscoping that was what dazzled me, I think, about this game. Not knowing what probably rotoscoping was,
right?
As somebody who was playing it.
For me, around this time, I think in '92, I actually played some of the original Prince of Persia. We had a computer lab in the engineering building where I was taking some classes. So I guess it would have been 92 or 93. And, I was in there doing my homework, and, people just left stuff on those computers. They were wiped like on a nightly basis or something by some IT person, probably some work study student coming in, and would clear off all the stuff that was, just installed on the PCs. But if you got there, and somebody had left something on the PC, you could jump in and play it. So I played a little bit of Civ that way. I played a fair amount of Prince of Persia that way, and some Commander Keen as well on those machines. So there were people who were just coming in consistently and just putting those games on, and it seemed like they were always available. If you showed up, you might have to check a few different computers to find it, but you'd ultimately find one installed. But this game was not one I played until its 20th anniversary release on the iPad. Was how I originally tried it, and thought, "Wow, this is really not made for on-screen controls."
No, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I got about 3 screens in and couldn't. The little things that were wriggling on the ground, little black worms. Yeah, I couldn't get past them. Yeah, no, I couldn't get low enough to kick. It was virtual joysticks, I think. And they're on the bottom of the iPad, which is, at the time quite heavy. They're lighter now, but at the time it's like this heavy iPad that's like dipping away from me, straining my wrists. It didn't end well. So I put it down. I was like, well, maybe someday. And here we are. So let's, you mentioned rotoscoping yourself. I mean, you claim not to have much of an idea of what it is, but I think you've got pretty much the grasp on it. What is your idea of what rotoscoping is?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know how often I guess it's starting to make a little bit of a comeback, but motion capture is probably taken its place. But as a child of the 80s, 70s and 80s, rotoscoping animated features was definitely a thing that I remember, especially the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's using film, right, of somebody running or doing something and then animating over that, tracing over the film to make it look lifelike and very human looking.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. That is that's what rotoscoping is. It's a pretty old technique. It goes back into the earliest Walt Disney features, and some animation predating Disney features, I believe. It was actually how the lightsabers were done.
I was going to say lightsabers are another famous kind of one.
And Star Wars, the first trilogy, whenever that came out, the actors were holding sticks, and the lights were put in later. And it basically just means painstakingly going frame by frame and drawing over. There are some really interesting later uses of rotoscoping in film, notably Richard Linklater in two of his movies, Waking Life and Scanner Darkly. Yeah, Scanner Darkly with Keanu are the two films that he used it in. I'm a huge fan of Waking Life. Really like that movie quite a lot. Seen it several times. And he uses it in a very kind of, well, it's a lot more automated there. I'm sure it was automated, as much as you could, because I don't think, in most cases it was not like a whole film was made with rotoscoping. It was certain sequences, to really bring something to life. The Blue Fairy, in Pinocchio is one example. There are some examples in Fantasia, but not every, scene of every character is done in this way. As you point out, motion capture is basically, the 3D version of rotoscoping these days. Though you could also do 3D animation with rotoscoping if you were really thoughtful and careful about how you put it all together. So
right, camera angles and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I think we're obviously like we said, we wanted to play this sort of mini series based around that concept. And for this game in particular, I probably would have played Prince of Persia before this game, of course. That was, and maybe even Karateka as being the other one, I think, that you mentioned. But for whatever reason, this one is the one that stuck with me, and not having the concept of it at the time of how they were achieving the effect that they're achieving as a teenager, kid, whatever. So I'm interested to have, if you can talk a little bit about the translate, because for the films, I can see the frame by frame reconstruction of it and the tracing of it. That makes sense to me because it's a 2D frame that is just one after another, and you just put the work in. Right. But for a game, I'm definitely both intrigued and confused about how that's used.
Right. Well,
in this context, because there's also polygons happening somehow.
Right.
So
So this one's a little different from, I believe Prince of Persia is still sprites. So it's a little, the sprites are created using rotoscoping, but here, rather than creating sprites that are, come from rotoscope data, they're creating polygons from rotoscope data. So it's not really that different. It just means, how you're storing that information. Prince of Persia probably has fewer overall frames of animation as a result, being on kind of similar hardware or similarly capable hardware at the time, even though I guess it's a little bit before. Karateka doesn't have tons, right? I mean, it's just really this guy kind of inching forward. I guess he can run, and then he can kind of drop into his stance and punch like low, middle, high, kick high and low or something like that. There's only like a handful of things that you can do, and each of those things are a couple of frames of sprites. Here, I think, and I'll have to double check that, but that's my recollection. Here, everything is done rather than drawing a sprite, and just like blitting, which is to say, just kind of splatting the bitmap into the space on screen. Instead, you just say, well, this is the origin of the character, draw the polygons. And so you just offset all the 2D points by the center or whatever you use as your root location for the character. So maybe the feet, who knows? It's hard to say for sure. But really, it's not substantially different from doing a sprite. You're just drawing polygons with an offset instead of just pasting an image in one place. So not really that different. Maybe a little more efficient for storage to get a little more out of it. Maybe there's only a handful of colors, so it's actually hard to say. I can't really tell you because downloading on the PlayStation 4 was 170 megabytes, which I'm pretty sure is several magnitudes higher than it would have been on the Amiga. So it was pretty funny watching that download. Which of course downloaded in no time at all. It just was funny to watch that number tick up to like, what are they doing with 170 megabytes? I guess there's a number of different audio implementations. I think they remastered the audio.
They did, yeah. They remastered the audio, and there's a remaster of the world.
Yeah, the visuals as well. Yeah, I played with the old visuals and the old audio, but that was just.
I did too. I played the GOG version. I don't think it has a high res mode, but I don't think it's the new art. I noticed I was looking on the Switch as the other version, but it was only a couple bucks on GOG, so I got it there.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So, how far had you made it in the past? I've already confessed. I made it to like the third screen on the iPad before I gave up, but you made it a little further.
Yeah, my memory is the caverns. When you go below, there's like the caves and I probably something related to the water is where I probably ended.
That's a pretty complicated sequence. I could see that.
Yeah, the ordering of that. And I don't think like where I got stuck was trying to figure out. I mean, I definitely want to talk about the puzzles and sort of just the game design itself, because it's as opposed to something like Prince of Persia, which has more sword combat and jumping and things like that. But the guys that are rolling the grenades at you, I don't think I had gotten that far, and I got stuck on those this time, and was like, there's no way you can jump over these things. This is impossible. I'm missing something, and I just love the puzzle solutions that he designed for this stuff, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. So the caverns, but I mean, it's like, it's for me, at least, it was always such an enticing world and an enticing game, and it was just endlessly frustrating to not get far into the game. Yeah, because it's just a compelling cover. It's a compelling concept with this sort of companion character that you break out and cross paths with multiple times, and some sort of like revolution happening or something. It's very minimalistic. It's very artistic, and even in the wiki, they mention some of the games that were influenced by it, like Eco, which you can see a lot of Eco in this game. And they mentioned Metal Gear, which I guess I kind of see, but the rotoscoping, I think to my untrained mind back then, it was very much like, how could they make the animation so fluid? It was
Yeah,
baffling my mind of like this, and to the point where it's like Mario, fun in a whole different way, whole different goals, but not known for the same sort of fidelity. It's not even the point, right? It's just
right,
different games. But
right.
at this time, it was like how it just felt unimaginable that they had figured this out. So it felt like a trailblazing kind of game to me at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that they do quite a lot with the polygons. I should note that I feel like you and I both went to this talk, but that
Yeah,
the
you mentioned that. Yeah,
classic games postmortem at GDC, probably was 2011,
it was, I
because
think.
because that would have been the 20-year anniversary, and it was, maybe that's why I picked it up that year. And he came, and Eric Chahi came and sort of talked through things. They're also doing lots of polygons for the backgrounds and everything. It is a polygonal game, which is pretty extraordinary in its own right, for the time, that when everything was pretty much sprites. This is one that actually, you can see why it would take a long time for one person to do it and have it end up being, it's really not that long. I mean, it's like full throttle, length, and it's like, well, it's long due to all the failure, but actually if you
Hmm.
just went through the game all in one go without any mistakes, it'd probably take no more than half an hour, probably less. It's pretty quick. I mean, it probably took me 3 ish to go through, just like failing forward constantly. And we'll talk about that kind of aspect of the design. But yeah, I mean, it's extremely cinematic. Its presentation is really interesting. I made a note of a couple of things. One is definitely feeling some Tron vibes, like the
Mm.
guy's sitting, in the case of Tron, he gets kind of shot in the back with the laser beam or whatever. But this is very sort of similar. Like, particle accelerators don't really work that way, but he's kind of just like at the end of the particle accelerator tube. It's like just happens to be there when the lightning
Where
hits.
his desk is? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
why is your desk right there?
yeah. That's not how they work. But I mean, they do accelerate particles in circles often. There's just not like a spot where you put your desk. There's like a hole looking into the particle accelerator. I thought that's very funny. But yeah, I mean, it's a cool idea. It definitely reminded me of like getting sent to another world, like in Tron, which would have been what, 84, 85, something like that. And being in a place you don't understand, and of course, in this case, then failing constantly at puzzles, until you kind of find your way through. I did pick up the manual at one point, mostly because I was like, am I missing anything with the controls?
Hmm.
Um, the because it's a little weird in that, like, you start off with like this down kick to deal with these worms that are on the ground. They actually take you through the first puzzle in that, and then give you a bunch of recommendations, which are good guidelines, for the rest of the game. Like, don't leave your alien buddy behind is one of them. So if there's ever a case where you can see him, or where he is, and you can help him progress, that's intended to
Yeah.
be helpful. So anyway,
Well, yeah, and I mean, to the puzzle point, like, there's assuming that you did it when you get to that first elevator, you go up to the top and there's that dome with a
yeah,
window,
yeah,
and you look out. It's just this great moment of setting the stage, and setting everything in its place, giving you context for this alien world. The aliens obviously don't speak your language, and so that's kind of taken care of. So there's just this mystery, and the reason I bring up eco is, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is there's kind of a minimalistic both design and aesthetic. You mentioned the color palette as well, right? Very consistent, and as we've talked about before, like, there could have been memory reasons for that, but it's also a constraint that I think brings good art design as well, to it. I think the aliens themselves are really cool looking and simple designs, but compelling. The dog creature, like the infamous in the game when you see it in the background um, on a cliff, kind of running right. It foreshadows that you're going to meet it again
Yeah.
quite early, and that sort of silhouette of that creature is also just very memorable and kind of legendary in a way. And then it comes back into the picture later on, which I again hadn't known because I didn't play that far before,
Right.
in the caged areas. But yeah, I just it just this sense of the thing about that I love about overall the puzzle design is that, and I had forgotten that we probably did go to that talk because of course I forget everything, and but I also had forgotten that he was working on it for basically solo other than audio stuff, and it feels like that. It feels like uh, a very yes game in a way, right? Where every scenario, every chunk of the game, every setting has kind of like logical puzzles, logical context for how you progress using the tools that you have, but also each one is fairly unique, right? There's not like it's just sort of, he had an idea for it, versus say, I guess other platformers, which often are about repeating mechanics in different ways. And there are definitely some repetition. The way you use the gun, for instance, in multiple different fashions is very cool. But the water thing or or the vehicle thing, which I just played before recording and I could not believe happened in the arena or whatever that was. That thing you're pressing all the buttons. Yeah. So it's just
that was a very space. What was that game called where you can't communicate because all the things have weird names? Space.
Oh, yeah, I have it on my phone. Space
something. Space Lab.
Space Team.
Space Team. Space Cam is a different thing. Yeah, Space Team, right. So I mean, I felt that, and like, oh my god, I need to hit the frambulator. If only I knew what the frambulator was.
Yeah,
kind of moment. At a certain point, it does kind of like there's like lights that turn red, and you're like, okay, not those. And then at a certain point, it also just like this one turns white, and it's like hit that button. Yeah, that's a pretty bizarre thing. We're just gonna escape through the gladiator pit, the Colosseum or whatever, and then get our ship will be blown apart, but we'll hit the escape hatch, and be shot off in our little pod somewhere else. And it's a definite strange
it's
thing.
Just like, let's do, it's just that that's what I kind of mean by the yes game. It's like, well, let's do this cool thing, and now let's do this cool thing, and and the constraints were what they were, but by and large, I assume he hand did all of this stuff, and
right.
Because he could do that, he could decide to put in a vehicle section, or but then there's a consistency and a cohesiveness to both the world and I think the design that I really appreciate. I noticed as we were getting ready in pre-show that they call this a cinematic platformer, which I guess I really hadn't thought about before. But now that you say it, it's like, okay, out loud, it's like, okay, I get what that means. Because he has so many tools at his disposal. There's some great perspective stuff that happens where, like, for instance, laser bolts are coming from the camera into the screen, things that, some really interesting puzzles with like reflection that is faked, of course, I assume. But like watching, on those green globes, I'm talking about, where there's like reflecting the enemy down below and waiting for them to on patrol. And then if you...
That's funny. I did not catch on that there was a reflection there. I just did it a number of times.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I caught on late.
I think at one time I did it. I basically was like, well, I'm going to go silently this time. And then I just shot the one shot, and I guess I made the connection that, I had to do it quiet. I had to go in that room quietly or whatever, not, I don't remember what it was, but I remember coming up with something in my head like, oh, he needed to not know I was coming,
Yeah, right,
type of
right.
thing, you know, and
And you lucked out.
I probably lucked out. Yeah.
He does patrol and he stands underneath it for a longer amount of time, so it gives
Oh,
you
okay.
time to do it. So I can see how that would happen accidentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just think like, though I think the telegraphing could be better at times, because I definitely got stuck in some things where I was like, I really don't get what to do. But there definitely was a consistency, and I love that that it wasn't just that oftentimes the puzzles had to do with using your weapon, but it wasn't about shooting things all the time. It was being clever with both level design and puzzle design, but using the tools like the gun as a utility rather than just killing something.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't, it's just a surprising, delightful experience, and it is very cinematic for what it is. And yeah, I don't know. It leaves me with a tone and a style that I think is very unique. And I'm surprised that it, in a way, that it was so influential because it was so hard. Because I can only imagine not many people finished it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back in the day. But.
Yeah, I think that was pretty common of these. I mean, Prince of Persia, the original, was a pretty difficult game as well. Karateka, not so much. And the Last Express, which was another Mechner title, was another one that was also rotoscoped, at least for the characters. Was also notoriously difficult. It's also maybe a kind of a French thing. Like, I'm not going to give you a 40-hour experience. I'm trying to tell a specific story, and I'm just going to make it very sort of designer led. I'm going to try to give you as much information as I can in the environment to maybe rationalize it after the case. I think in some cases, I'm thinking of like jumping down where the awnings are, and I mean, there's like the guy's got to help you to get across. But the reason is because if you just fall straight down, the awning won't flip you into the passageway it needs to. You need to be kind of heading in that direction and things like that. So it kind of like makes some sense when you see it. You're like, oh, okay, I see why it fails. If I don't do this thing right. There seems to be like some, I guess it's sort of world building and logic on top of it. The other designer that comes to mind, I think this is also because he's also French, is David Cage, who does a lot of this sort of thing, in terms of, I'm going to do lots of unique things you don't normally see in games, and tie them together and do an overarching story. Yeah, with a lot of sort of custom events. It's like, well, you can pick up the guitar and play that using the controls you're already comfortable with. He did some stuff that was more with some motion controls, I guess, with the different controllers, maybe the DualShock, whatever 2, I don't know, whatever the one was that, I guess on the PS3 you could kind of like shake and stuff like that. He would do things with that, which, again, seeking a cinematic kind of experience where you can do a lot of things that people actually do, and in a more realistic, maybe a melodramatic context, but taking sort of simple movements that the player can do and like transposing them into lots of different situations, which feels like the same thing here. I mean, there's like, there's basically, D-pad buttons and 3 other buttons to do everything you can do. And I guess actually it's not even that many, because the two buttons do jump. So you don't need both of them. They just were both mapped on my controller, and sometimes I use one versus the other, but to no real reason. So it's like really 5 inputs, because I don't think you even really can use the up very much, I guess, when you swim. But also this game has swimming. Like, it's just adds stuff in all over the place. And it's like, well, I'll do this now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's still just so fascinating that this is also the same. I mean, if you think about where Nintendo is at this point, and it's like So obviously, we all know that Mario feels good when he's jumping, and how you use the different physics that Mario has perfected over the years, and the tuning and balancing of all that stuff. And so that's one of the advantages, and it just feels great and predictable and all of those sorts of things. And then you play this, and it's like it's you can't say that the jumping really. I know this is going to sound like negative, but nothing really feels good. It's not a
Right. Yeah.
mechanically rich game. It is very much a cinematic. Even the jump is like, it's very specific.
Yeah.
Um, it's going to do a specific thing every time. As far as like its distance, you can't control it. You don't have a lot of options with it, right? It's not systemic in any way. And so even the jumps in a way almost are puzzles.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's just,
especially when
yeah,
you're avoiding the gnashing teeth that are under the
yeah,
ground, these alien, it's like, it's also kind of motivated in the same way Mario is, where it's like, well, none of it really makes sense. There's mushrooms and, whatever, and
yeah,
stars and flowers and things. Here it's like it's an alien world that has the same sorts of abstractions. Well, there's these creatures that live in the rocks, I guess, that are just mouths. All you can see is the mouth. If you stand on the mouth, you get eaten. And you have to use the two types of jump, the standing jump and the long jump, the running jump, to get past things like that. Tentacles that just drop from the ceiling, etc. It's not. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I mean, nothing does feel, awesome. I would say, with the exception of one moment where you're exiting the screen to the right with your gun, and an alien comes from off that side and sort of grabs you, and you kick him in the nuts.
yeah,
But when he picked you up, like, your gun got thrown, and
yeah,
so your gun is back on the ground, a little ways away. For a while, it took me a while to understand what I was seeing. I'm like, what did I just drop? And of course, I don't have anything. I don't know why I didn't go, oh, my gun. But when he goes over there, and I think it's the only time he does it in the game, he sort of like dives, does like
yeah.
a
It
little
does a
dive roll
roll.
and spins
Yeah,
up, with the gun to shoot it. And it's a whole like action moment that, has a unique animation, I believe. I don't think that's ever used again. And it's super good. Like, that whole sequence is really, really good. And it's
yeah,
sort of those lots of little bespoke moments that are, the sorts of things that we'll probably remember, because they really are. I mean, they are cinematic, even though it's this, for me, 320 by 200 low poly, experience. I guess you also played it that way.
yeah. And it's, yeah. I mean, I hesitated in bringing up the the comment about it, how it feels, and I guess to refine it more, it isn't even about that I miss that it feels in some particular way, or that it should have. It just wasn't the goal. You
Right.
know, Mario is all about giving richness in the level design and the way that the characters move, so you can adapt, right? And skill becomes a really important part. But this is very much a trial and error game. You're gonna die a lot, and there is skill involved, but it's more just kind of about going through the process of playing the game. And
Right.
again, coming back to that cinematic word. So it's not meant to be a criticism that it doesn't feel good. I think it's a different feeling,
Yeah.
than sort of the hands-on sticks mechanics of it that you would
Um,
get from a Nintendo game.
yeah. It makes me think a little bit of like, I mean, even though it's not this, it has a similar gameplay feeling to me of like a bullet shooter, or like a
The
Contra. I
precision, the
mean, yeah,
precision of it.
exactly. Doing the
Yeah.
right thing, doing the right thing, figuring out a series of right things that you have to do, and then having to execute that, kind of perfectly. I mean, the gunplay can be somewhat more forgiving, because you can use your gun to put up a shield versus just a regular pew pew pew, and then there's a bigger bullet which takes down shields. These two
Hmm.
putting up the shield and taking down a shield are using a charging mechanic for the gun of two different lengths, much longer to do the sort of takedown bullet. And it's a little weird. I'm not sure that the gun makes a lot of sense. It feels like early on the gun has basically very little charge, and then later it seems like it holds charge kind of indefinitely. I mean, it's a story charged gun, I guess, more than it is a systemically charged gun. But that's another example of just like it chooses moments over systems in a lot of ways.
He just does what he needs to do to make the moment work. I mean, not to like dig too academically into the lineage kind of side of it, but the other, you have Prince in this, and then you have Prince that kind of spawns into action adventure, sort of third person action adventure games. I'll say, like, I'm making a big leap there, but you have the Prince of Persia games, but before that, and the game that actually a 3D game that it reminds me of is actually Tomb Raider, which we played for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Her jumps have a specificity to them because of the grid, the block kind of grid construction of the world, right? Where there's a metric, and we dealt with this when I was working on Tomb Raider, even though in the reboot we consciously made a choice to give the player more, because there's air steering and there's different things that give the player more agency. But in the games that Crystal and Core worked on before that, it was a lot more specific of like, you jump here and she will jump this distance, and you need to learn that,
Yeah.
And so kind of, definitely many, many steps ahead, but you can see, and I still remember it from the original Tomb Raider, there's those sort of like footfalls where you want to press the button right at the edge, because that's going to be the distance she needs. And she does put her hands out to grab. So there's a little bit of variability there, but it is a pretty precise action. And it's very smooth and fluid, and at the time looked really cool animation wise and stuff. And so, I don't know. It's just interesting to see, again, the influences of something like this, when then you see Mario and its influence, and that fork in the road for a bunch of other games. That lead to Rare or wherever.
Right.
This kind of is the other fork in a way, this and Prince of Persia and stuff. And so, I don't know, it's just such a fascinating thing to see how things step forward with these sort of foundational games.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's also sort of a split between PCs and consoles. At the time, right. I think that
input's huge. Yeah,
input is a huge thing, but also just like very hard limits on sprites on the NES, for example. Meant that Mario. I mean, there's also design reasons why you do this. He's very boxy. Like he basically fills up, a certain sprite with pixels. I mean, honestly, he was done very animated in very much the same way that Mechner did his, in the sense of like, well, he had a pixel grid, but he was laying his pixel grid over the top of some photos of his brother. Chahi, I don't remember the specifics of how he got his, but I'm sure it was kind of in a similar vein. And in the case of Mario, they're literally just have graph paper, and they're like, this is the size of the character. You need to convey this many states, and draw it freehand, but you have this many grid, pixels to work with, and they did the levels that way as well as long scrolling things as well. So they're using actually sort of similar planning techniques, for how they're gonna actually get the thing in, and in that case create the sprites, and in this case create the polygons. But to very different ends, and like you said, there's a sort of precision, and here it's like, well, there were cases where I'm like, well, why would those, like with those things on the ground that you have to jump over, like sometimes you want to do a standing jump, other times you want to do a running jump, coming back, through that area. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, there are definitely times where I'm like, I would love him to just jump to this spot, because he knows he needs to jump to that spot. I just, there's definitely a like, making the player have to do the thing. Here that I'm like, I admire modern games for like, well, the character that the player is playing, like Batman for Arkham, for example, he's Batman, and he'll just land in a good spot, right? And in this case, it's like, no, he's just some guy, which means he's a real stand-in for the player. Like, well, it could be anybody who got teleported to another dimension via their particle accelerator I'm looking here, after on a professor's salary, he pulled up in his Ferrari. Definitely some projection there, I think, on the part of young Mr. Chahi, of what he was looking for in life. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with all of that, but just very different ends, I guess, they're pursuing through very similar kinds of means. And what they're trying to convey and get mileage out of. With Mario, it's like, well, we're going to have lots of different elements. We're going to have this sort of scrolling background, etc. We're going to create the sprites in basically the same way as this thing is created, in a very similar way. But here it's like, I'm going to use this just on a very bespoke, linear, one way through, got to do it the way I say kind of game. And it's just fascinating to see those forks, in the road. It doesn't feel like we have a lot of that differentiation, not as much of that differentiation anymore, I guess, especially in the 3D world where everything's kind of quote unquote real valued,
Yeah. I mean, it's genre creation is fewer and far between these days, right?
Yeah.
It definitely still happens, but yeah. And also because games have become a different kind of business, I feel like it's on a different scale. Like, the early games that influenced how live games work versus bespoke games maybe is another fork in the road, right? You can go back and look at the games that influenced that, like MMOs and stuff or something. Yeah, it's a fascinating. Somebody should do a podcast about this whole thing. But yeah, I mean,
you're also looking at a game where it's like one person can work on this for 2 years alone, and it can still be profitable. Whereas, against some of the other games from the era that we played, like the Mega Mans and the Marios and things like that, where it's like actually small teams worked on this for maybe a year, at most for a Mega Man or something like that, or 18 months or something like that, for a lot of those kinds of games, and end up with a very varied, sort of multiple levels. You've got lots of designers kind of coming up with new mechanics for each level, or how are they going to use the jumps differently, and lots of things having to do with spacing. And here it's like, no, I just had the one story I wanted to tell. And it was this guy going to this other universe and making a friend, and busting out of jail during the revolution or something, and it's a cool story. And it's a very different sort of experience from what you were getting elsewhere.
Well, and I think because it's so bespoke, and because like we talked about, it's him kind of coming up with an idea and then implementing that idea. There's constant, and not that Mario doesn't have constant surprises, but I think it's different sorts of surprises and different sorts of delights and things. But like I said earlier, both the sections I kind of vaguely remember from playing and getting stuck back in the day, but then, having the whole water sequence happen, having swimming be a thing, having that vehicle thing occur,
falling through the pipes. Like there's just these very specific things that make it very memorable, and they only happen once, there's only one section. But then something like the water thing, repurposing sections of levels that you had been running through before, right? That's a great trope that a lot of games have used since, and have always used in some ways. But this is one of the early games, I think, from a world and level design perspective, platformer wise, or side scroller wise, it's a really good example of kind of that repurpose. Of course, we have Metroid out there these days too, doing some of that stuff. But or come on, Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess
now I
know how much
know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's it's nice. And I think there's a singular vision to this game too, that I think is very apparent when you find out and know that one person worked on it, and getting that, or largely worked on it and getting that very consistent look. Because I've always appreciated the world design, and not just the design of it, but just the visual design and the aesthetic of everything. And it's just very memorable. I love stark alien worlds, or stark worlds in general. And it's just, I think I'm glad we played this, because coming back to it had a lot of nostalgia for me, and it reminded me why this game has always stuck with me, even though I had never gotten far. I don't know, a third of the way maybe is where it was at, probably. But it still had that impact, just the teleporting into this pool of water and having this sort of tentacle thing, and that beast and the cage, it's just, and then the aliens and kind of what's going on with the revolution. And he doesn't have to tell you much. And in seeing that I'm almost done, you don't find out much,
Right.
It's all very minimalistically told, but that's what I love about it.
Yeah, no, it's very mysterious. I also, another game I think of is Myst, where you're not really clear what's going on much of the game. Of course, but ultimately you kind of figure it out, start figuring more of it out. But a lot of games of that era kind of have this like, well, I don't really know why I'm here and what I'm doing, but it does really kind of at that level of abstraction, without going into a ton of depth. I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't really need lore. Just need a sense of mystery. This game has a sense of mystery, all about, there's like a harem or something, or
yeah,
I don't know.
That was surprising. Yeah.
I don't know if that's what it was, because of course we don't really know. Could have just been like a bathhouse or something like that too, as well. I guess felt like there were guards there, so I immediately
I think it was implied. Unfortunately, it implied that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But but it's not like you run into anybody who is specifically a prince or whatever, some kind of royal to set up any of that. So it is a very sort of strange sort of thing. There's also that whole thing with the in the caves where there's that bat that you have to like shoot. To get to come into the next screen, and I don't know, it's just wild.
They're very, very unique. Yeah. It is a kind of a weird merger of adventure games in a way, right? It is an action adventure in that way too. Cause I don't remember how it happened, but I got stuck there a little bit too. But I had remembered earlier that somehow I had scared that bat away and it had flown away. And I thought it was just an ambient thing, but very rarely is something in this game just ambient.
There are always clues. It actually moves the first time there's the avalanche. Or whatever,
okay,
falling
that's what
rocks,
it was.
and it moves,
so it gives you a little clue. So and even though it is a fail forward and there's a lot of, it's basically a trial and error game. There's a lot of times when you're going to get killed by a rock that you probably didn't see coming.
Yeah, exactly. But section with falling stones is a bit rough. ... Not sure how to time that.
Yeah. There's definitely many of those, or somebody comes from off screen and just shoots you. Yeah. So that's unfortunate, and that's a design aesthetic of the time, and unfortunately, and we've luckily moved on, hopefully, as much as we can from that mentality. But I do applaud him in that many, many times, if you were very sharp, there was some telegraphing going on about the bat's a good example. It's like, oh, that's right, that bat will move, and and that will allow me to do this, that, or the other thing. I also wrote down Dragon's Lair a little bit too, in that sort of, quickly assessing the situation kind of concept and picking a thing to do. Obviously there's it's a whole different gameplay type, but there is still that sense of, at least the way I played Dragon's Lair, mostly it was dying and then
Yeah,
replaying, and like,
exactly.
okay, now I know the pattern. Even though
Well,
I
I mean,
could
and
have
that was Don
technically,
Bluth, right? Another
yeah,
rotoscoper.
no,
So
rotoscoping is again. So, it's still another, yeah, and that's another good example for this topic.
yeah, for sure. Well, we're gonna play some more rotoscoped games. We're still kind of arguing over which ones. You've heard us mention some though already, so some of those will probably be turning up. It's really a question of getting a little bit of coverage and of some games, but not we don't want to do this for weeks and weeks. So we're probably not going to play any one of them. We're even thinking necessarily to finish them. I was not expecting to finish Another World based on my prior experience, but it is to your point. I think a lot of, if you have a sort of adventure game sensibility, from playing them back at the time, playing this one is actually, they don't have voice like a Day of the Tentacle to sort of direct you, voice lines or written lines or whatever to sort of clue you in to the thing, as well as those did. But in general, like you were saying, there are little tells, that sort of, even making that bat red, makes it stand out so that it's not just visual noise,
And it's the only time you see that bat. So, it's,
yeah,
you have a sense that it's probably not ambient, just, flavor.
right.
Yeah.
Not just there for, it definitely has all of that. So we'll be turning back to these some more over the coming weeks. We haven't set an end date or anything like that, but we're looking forward to playing some more. It's fun to go back to play some of these, games that I haven't looked at in, decades. So I guess that's what we do here. But these are also the sorts of games that don't have, clear antecedents today. It's like you don't go and pick up another one of these today. You might play an action adventure that has a lot of sort of custom content in it. I guess that'd be the closest, but it's generally going to be 3D, or it's generally going to be whatever. And it's going to be more like it's mechanically the same everywhere except for some sort of special cases. And this is very much its own thing. Because in part it's so short. So, but a fun game. I'm glad to finally finish Another World, because it's one of those that I've always thought kind of like, someday I'm going to play that game. So,
well, and I'm so close. I should be able to.
Yeah, you're basically done. So,
thank God this won't be added to the list.
The list, the capital T and the capital L in those words. Okay, let's turn to a couple of emails. These are sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Take it away, sir.
Okay, if you build it, they won't come. From Mystery Dip. Hello, Mystery. Hi, Brett and Tim. I don't want to throw too much shade at the Trespasser team. But I think it's a good example of aspiring devs out there. A good example for aspiring devs out there. In my travels on message boards and social media, I've seen people who think my game will be a viral success if I can just make it technically impressive enough. I've personally been guilty of this mentality at times. Surely, people will be in such awe of my technical prowess, they'll write articles and share my game with all their friends. This morning, I saw a news blurb on a desktop environment for Linux, which was noteworthy for being written entirely in Ruby. My first thought was, that's great, but what can it do for me? And that's what I think the key. That's I think the key that a lot of people miss. The takeaway from id's success with Doom was not that it was technically impressive, but that it was fun to play. The eye candy and frame rate made it an easier sell for sure, but the tech enhanced the gameplay, not the other way around. Looking forward to see future release of Tim's VR-enabled alien-themed reskin of Trespasser Mystery Dip. P.S. I was listening to an interview with Mike Fisher, former product manager and vice president at Sega of America, and he had a couple quotes that were relevant here. At one point, he was talking about Shenmue on the Dreamcast and how many of the features are now staples in mainstream games. But because it was one of the first to do things, didn't sell well. Sometimes being first or early to market can be just as damaging as being late, as the quote. That's a good quote. Later on, he was talking about the time he sat in on a focus group for the Sega Sports division. They had people playing the Sega football game. After they were done, they all agreed that yes, this and that were better done, and it was technically superior to Madden. They were then asked, so will you switch? To which they all answered no, because all of my friends play Madden. PPS, last I promise. If the only reason Doom was popular was from the tech used, it would have fallen out of favor when the tech was surpassed. Instead, people are still playing, porting, and creating content for it nearly 30 years later. Thank you, Mystery Dip. Good points.
Good points. Good points all around. Appreciate them. Yeah, I mean, I think that Doom's gameplay and the tech are probably a little tighter integrated than you think. I think that really design wise, it's if you look at the map, if you have the map overlay, that's the game. But the visuals being from the first person perspective actually make it really, really compelling in a way that I don't think you can separate from the tech. But if there were a lot of kind of uninspired shooters around the same time that we don't still play today, that don't still have, a modding community or whatever. I think John Romero came out with a new sigil a few weeks ago when Doom's 30th happened, or 30th. So you have that to look forward to. I know how much you enjoyed Sigil. There's a Sigil 2. They're still innovating and coming up with cool stuff there, but it's both, I think, in that game.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, there's a lot of things that went right there. But I think if it was just tech alone, I mean, I know what he's saying as far as like the tech demo approach, which I think Trespasser was very much like we talked about on the series, it's, and yeah, he used the Field of Dreams reference, but I will still, again, reuse the Jurassic Park reference, which is endlessly applicable. It's just like should we or could we, build something, and Trespasser feels that way. For sure. Yeah. It just feels like we got to try to do this thing without really kind of getting all the way to where they needed to. And I won't name the game, but to your point about Doom inspired shooters of the time and the ones that we remember and don't remember, just recently playing a shooter that, that technically and visually, this is a fairly modern game, technically and visually very good and accurate and fun, or fun for what it was trying to do visually, but the gameplay just isn't there, and thus it's like it can't stand on just the technical side alone and the art side.
The other part of that, he was sort of saying, well, I see message boards and all that. If they just see how good my tech is, somebody else's tech is always better. It's really hard to compete on technical standards these days. I mean, there are so many gorgeous games that come out, it seems like, on a daily basis. So I don't know, trying to compete on technical merits alone, that's a tough one to compete on. So all right, I've got one here. This one has a question for the podcast. It's from Carlos. He says, hi, thank you so much for your time on the podcast. It's really nice to hear your insightful thoughts as well as your healthy and positive values. I wanted to ask, have either of you or someone you know ever worked on a game you didn't particularly like? I don't mean this in a negative way, like, oh, this game was bad. I'm picturing a situation where you were not part of the team making important choices and your creative tastes were different than theirs. How do you deal with working on a project that can take years of hard work while knowing the result is a game you wouldn't necessarily care to play? Many thanks, Carlos. I don't know. Do you have any examples of that? I mean, I've definitely worked on stuff where I'm like, this is actually not the sort of game I normally play. But nothing that's seen the light of day. So it's hard to talk about those necessarily.
No, I mean, it is. I think it's a good question, Carlos, and it is, I don't know, very common is maybe too exaggerated, but it is a common thing for any developer, game developer, to, because you sometimes you have to go to where the work is. I mean, I will sort of selfishly say that I have been extremely lucky in my career, and I'm as you're asking the question, I'm trying to think back, and there's definitely, I've had better times on certain games versus other games, but as far as like working on a game that I didn't want to work on or that I didn't think was where I wanted to really spend my time, I've been very lucky. Almost everything I've worked on, I've wanted to work on and appreciate.
Yeah, same here. The wanting to work on it part. It's just not always that the game is something I would naturally play. Was the distinction I was making there. Not that I didn't enjoy doing the work. I think that's tricky. I did work with somebody ages ago, not for a very long time, but who was very opposed to guns and gun games, and was nonetheless working in a studio which, previously had been working on, sorts of things that didn't bother him, and then the next one was one where that was a bother, and he just worked on different parts of the game, and didn't really play test that part of the game, and just found other things to do, on that game, because of his personal values, and the company worked with him on that. Very talented engineer. That's another case, but there's also, people who, I mean, we're working towards, markets often. Like, we know who we're building the game for, and not everybody on the team is one of the people we're building the game for. That's just a fact, and whether that's always true of, whether that's ever true of Tim or I don't know, but in general, you're going to find, especially as games get bigger and bigger and need more and more people, you're going to find games that just aren't connecting with some of the people making them, but they're still going to do their best work that they can to make them happen. So yeah, that's I can't think of anything where I'm like, I mean, there are games I've worked on where I'm like, I'm not sure I would necessarily play this. In fact, a lot of games I've worked on I don't want to play, but that's because I worked on them. Don't want to ever see it again. So but or at least not till a lot of time has passed. But that's more of a familiarity problem than it is I don't like the style game. Well, thank you for those. Sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We appreciate your emails. We also love to see reviews. Haven't had one in a minute. We get the ones for the Apple podcast, but if you're sending them into Spotify or whatever else, drop us a line. Let us know. We'd love to read those things on the air. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, on Twitter at devgameclub, or I am occasionally twitching Kingdom Hearts 3 these days at twitch.tv/Brett Douville, and he is twitching, I believe, Final Fantasy VI is his next thing at twitch.tv/Tim
Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Do I have that right? You're going back into the
Yep, I am. I've decided. Yeah, well, obviously, I need to play it one way or the other for the charity event, but I've decided to actually start over.
Wow.
So that's going to be. I think I'm going to regret it, but maybe not. Maybe I only regret it in that I've spent a lot of time on that game already, and so. But it's a classic. Replaying it probably is going to be a joy, and I will see and experience things that I didn't before. And I probably have forgotten a lot of it. So
yep, that's probably
visit
true.
It that way too. I think I'm going to get that new version that just came out. Steam. Supposedly it's a good version. So that's what We also have an Instagram, and we're on Threads, and so I'm just plug those a little bit. Club, if you want to go over and join up on that, I'm sort of keeping that going a little bit.
All right, cool, excellent. I will be sure to put links for those in the show notes. We have a fan-run Discord. There's a link for that in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton. Commissioned by Friendly Cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our store, all by Mark Garcia with some friends helping out on the Discord. Well, have fun flying into the sunset on a Wyvern this week. And good night.
Good night. Is that what happens?
Teasers, that's ahead for you.
Nice.